Hi, my name is Lila White. I'm the Minnesota Green Corps member serving this year at Metro Blooms. I'm a candidate for a bachelor's degree at the U of M in Environmental Science Policy and Management. And my community service is focused on the Lawns to Legumes program this year. So I'm really happy to be a part of it. So let me give you an introduction to the Lawns to Legumes program. The Lawns to Legumes program has three primary goals. The first of which is to protect pollinators and with a focus on the federally endangered state bee, the rusty patch bumblebee. We also want to protect those other at-risk pollinators, but this was really designed to give that endangered species some protection, thought, and awareness. Second is how we actually want to go about protecting these species, and that is assisting landowners across the state in getting high quality habitat in the ground. And third, tied directly to that second point, is that we don't just want to get plants in the ground. We want to ensure the long-term success of plantings by emphasizing the importance of land care and recognizing that this isn't a one-year project, but hoping that we're building a native pocket of plantings throughout the city that will persist for a long time. So I would like to introduce to anyone who isn't familiar with the rusty patch bumblebee, or Bombus affinis. Bombus affinis. The rusty patch bumblebee was once common through the United States, from the north central to the northeast and even southeast by the Carolinas. So the rusty patch bumblebee was added to the endangered species list this past year, and Minnesota named the rusty patch bumblebee our new state bee. Populations have declined dramatically over the past 20 years. Losses of populations have been seen up to 90% compared to just 20 years ago. And in terms of range where they roam, it has been constricted up to 99%, meaning it doesn't have habitat to roam from place to place. However, Minnesota is a stronghold for this bee species right here in the Twin Cities. These projects that we put in place can have a great impact on the conservation of the species. I, along with all of you, are not entomologists. We do have an entomologist on staff. His name is James Wolfen, and he actually puts these PowerPoints together, and he's actually in this picture right here when they instated the rusty patch bumblebee as our new state bee.
There he is.
So in order to conserve the bee, we want residents to understand its basic needs. First of all, the rusty patch bumblebee is a ground nesting bee. So a bare patch of soil is suitable habitat for nesting. The next point is key, which is to have staggered bloom times throughout the growing season. The rusty patch bumblebee is active from April to October, and different bloom times is truly needed for its survival. We want you to think about the impact of residential projects. All of your plantings will be working together in a connected matrix. So we want to make sure that we are sourcing plants free of chemicals and that using pesticides is really your last resort, and focus on different ways we can use pest management to establish those native gardens. Okay. This map you see here was created by Bowser, and it shows priority zones for the rusty patch bumblebee conservation as it relates to individual support. The Minnesota State Legislature approved $900,000 in 2019 to help create habitat for our new state bee and other struggling pollinators. And a good chunk of that money is available to residential landowners as a cost share to help get more pollinator habitat in the ground. So every resident in the state of Minnesota can apply for a cost share at bluethumb.org/L2L, which is the third point at the bottom. There you can submit an application for up to $350 to kickstart your own pollinator planting on your own residence. How we determine which sites are more critical is through this map. The three colors represent three tiers. So the dark green is a high priority for the rusty patch bumblebee for conservation areas, which is where we see rusty patch live. And the lime green is the middle priority, where we will consider granting those support grants. And then the pale yellow is the lowest priority zone, where we don't really see the rusty patch living. So where the rusty patch bumblebees are, we want to establish more habitat for it to survive. And if you see the Twin Cities area, we are in a high priority conservation zones. So let's make a difference.
Yeah.
So this second type of grant is a demonstration neighborhood grant. The deadline for these grants has passed, and actually we were granted along with partnership with the Corcoran Neighborhood Organization, and our project this year is the Corcoran and Phillips Pollinator Project, which provides funding for native plantings and pollinator-friendly trees and shrubs in green spaces to protect these pollinators. So the program includes training on how to care for your outdoor spaces, and in the form of workshops, coaching, and one-on-one consultations from our landscape designers as a participant once you sign up on this project. We're focusing on making this available to communities we haven't reached in the past by making it little to no cost. As an in-kind match, we are allowing participants to apply volunteer hours by gardening their own and installing their own pollinator-friendly garden in their lawns. This project is available for residents of the Corcoran and Phillips neighborhoods. So one of our most common questions is, what is a legume and why do we want to plant a garden of peas? So we would just want to note that Lawns to Legumes is just a name of the program, and that residents don't have to use only legumes and plantings. However, legumes aren't just peas. Legumes are a whole family of flowers, including really great pollinator-friendly plants. These are all native plants that the rusty patch bumblebee has evolved with that evolves with over the growing season. From early blooming bluebells and columbine through the summer and into the last of the asters and hyssop, the rusty patch bumblebee depends on being able to find high quality nectar and pollen throughout the growing season. So all of these plants can be used in Lawns to Legumes plantings, and we encourage diversity. This is a pollinator or a planting to pollinator guide that Bowser has put together, and is one of the many resources that we want to make available as simple guides to start your own pollinator garden. This is publicly available online and is a highly recommended resource for individuals to follow along with. We will be sharing this with you in the follow-up email. So gardening with native plants can be intimidating, but these simple templates, which are also different resources that Bowser is making available, and we will add to our follow-up email, are meant to help anyone who can wield a shovel and create high-quality habitat. So it's an easy-to-use guide that you can that you can adjust to your size and shape of your garden, of the planting that you have on your landscape, and offers these different species that go well together, designed by our designers.
Great, thank you so much, Lila. With that last slide too, I would add you'll see a continuum of bloom time from spring, summer, and fall. And we're going to talk about a lot of biodiversity, adding diversity to your landscape, today. And we want to for sure provide foraging resources for the rusty patch bumblebee and our other winged friends blooming throughout the season. And back in the day, I used to design just to have flowers blooming for our own benefit, because that's a big part of it, is I get enjoyment out of seeing these flowers myself. So this is a great guide. John, how are you doing? Are you with us?
Ready to go.
Great. So John, why don't you introduce yourself real quick to your other hat, or one of the other hats that you wear?
Sure. Well, as the Director of Education, I have been, back before COVID, I was traveling around the state giving this presentation in Bemidji and St. Cloud and Rochester, among other places. And I have the unfortunate responsibility right now of going through the doom and gloom of this presentation. I am going to keep it short. But research shows that a little bit of doom and gloom really helps, frame an issue and help motivate people to take action at the end. So that said, let's jump into it. The first problem that we're seeing across the board for Minnesota's wildlife, especially the rusty patch bumblebee, is a loss of habitat. This map of Minnesota on the screen has a lot of yellow on it. All of that yellow is what used to be prime bumblebee habitat, native prairie land. The little red splotches that you see indicate what's left of that prairie land. And to get even just a wee bit more depressing, those red splotches, a lot of them have been enlarged so that they're visible to the human eye at this scale. And so it's an overrepresentation of the native habitat that's left for pollinators. Now, what has that been replaced with? On the left of the screen, you see 3 different kinds of monocultures. A lot of people talk about monoculture and they think agriculture, and that is true. A lot of our prairie has been, converted into corn and soybeans. But if you think of monoculture in the sense of just growing like things together, suburban housing developments are, a form of monoculture, especially when you think that they, all have then Kentucky bluegrass as the predominant planting connecting them all. And even in more urban areas, we have giant parking lots, and a lot of cities, somewhere between a quarter and a half of their surface area, are devoted to cars and helping them travel from place to place and park. Monocultures are really efficient at delivering what you need delivered. Single family housing, or single person transit mobiles, or a bunch of corn. But they are not good at answering a lot of demands at once. That's why what Lila said, we're looking to increase the diversity of our yards. And you'll find throughout the presentation, when we talk about resilience, we're oftentimes talking about diversity. So in the metro area, you can see these are the remaining native plant communities outlined in purple, mostly along the Minnesota River in wetlands that I'm sure we've tried to drain at some point and just can't, and up in Anoka County. So our rusty patch is struggling, and that's not the only thing that's struggling. This is an image of the country, and just from space, NASA has been able to estimate how much lawn exists in the country. And they've come up with 50,000 square miles. I used to call Kentucky bluegrass an ecological desert, but I realized that that was unkind and unfair to deserts, which are actually full of, you know, an amazing diversity of creatures with remarkable adaptations to live in such a hostile environment. In the stormwater industry, we call Kentucky bluegrass green concrete because it doesn't infiltrate water very well, and it also doesn't provide habitat, forage for very many of the wildlife that we want to support. Other kind of challenges that the rusty patch is facing, along with Minnesota's environment, is the use of pesticides and pollutants. Many of you have probably heard about neonicotinoids, which are a class, a family of insecticides that are applied to plants to make them toxic to insects that are mostly, you know, chewing on their leaves. They're really good at that. They're so good, in fact, the way they work is they get taken up by the plant itself and then expressed in all the plant tissue, including the pollen and nectar that a plant treated with neonics produces. At lethal doses, clearly a bee will die, as lethal implies. At sublethal doses, scientists have seen bees get disoriented, not return to their hive, not have the energy or memory that they need in order to fulfill the functions that they need to support their hive and make sure that they can produce another generation. So that's just one kind of pesticide, but across the board, you know, our pollinators are facing a lot of challenges with that. And beyond our pollinators, our birds rely on native insects that if we all kill off with insecticides, all of a sudden we don't have songbirds in the morning either. So we are going to encourage you throughout this presentation to use manual methods for, say, maintaining a garden, pulling weeds. We'll have tips and tricks about that, but we encourage you as much as possible to refrain from using pesticides. If you can find another way, please try that. The other pollutant that we want to touch on real quick is impervious areas are generally treated with salt over the winter to make sure that the ice melts. That's important. We don't want anyone to slip and fall and break their hip, but that salt flows off of the impervious surface with the melt water into storm drains and unfiltered into our local bodies of water where it accumulates. We have salt accumulating in all of Minneapolis lakes, and at some point in the next few decades, some of them will lose their freshwater status and become, I think, semi-saline or brackish, but would be how the scientists would classify it, which kills a lot of the animals and plants living in that. So this is what I was talking about with storm drains. If a house is designed correctly, you'll have water fall on the roof and through the gutters and out this downspout where it runs over the, as I call it, green concrete that doesn't infiltrate much runoff into the curb, which is connected to a storm drain, picking up all kinds of technical term gunk, sorry, along the way. And carrying that to what is maybe the, the part that most people don't see or recognize, this third picture in the series of the outlet where that water comes out unfiltered into local bodies of water. and causes salt pollution as well as eutrophication with excess nutrients that the runoff can pick up, especially if it's carrying a bunch of organic matter. When we talk about resilient yards, part of it is going to be capturing some of this runoff, and instead of letting it run over your lawn, maybe putting in a rain garden or something right there in order to, you know, capture some of that and let it sink in. Now, runoff isn't why you probably came to this presentation, but we can't help but talk about it some, especially because it is getting more of it every year. You probably don't need me to tell you last year was the wettest year on record. It's not likely that we'll see that again this year and every year forward, but we are seeing a trend of wetter and wetter years. And that runoff is going to, there we go. That runoff is going to further impact the quality of our lakes and rivers, 56% of which are currently classified as impaired by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. So we face a lot of conservation challenges, habitat loss, pesticides, pollutants, and water pollution is things we touched on. There are more, and we could get into all of these, but I want to keep on moving into what you came to learn about, the what we can do to meet these challenges head on, because we all can play a significant role in addressing these in our yards, and with collectively starting to build an ecosystem that works. Really quick, if you have any questions at this point about lawns to legumes or challenges, you can submit them in the chat. Unless I see any pop up, we're just going to keep on rolling. And if you if you're still typing, I'll answer them in the chat as well. Yeah.
And also I'm going to add, when we do go to the breakout sessions, you're going to have an opportunity to talk to Lila specifically about the Lawns to Legumes program. So you'll have an opportunity to ask questions there too.
Yes. And, you know, and then with your landscape designer, you'll be able to ask them questions as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about creating pollinator habitat. Again, I want to remind you what pollinators need. They need protection from pesticides. They need clean water resources. They need staggered bloom times, flower resources throughout the season. The rusty patch, as a large and furry bee, is able to fly at colder temperatures than most other bees. That means that it's up earlier in the spring and out later in the fall than just about any other pollinator we have in Minnesota. So April through October, it needs something to eat. It also requires nesting sites, that's holes in the ground, that it can dig itself, or it oftentimes can take over an abandoned rodent's nest. We'll talk about maintenance and how to kind of leave some possible nesting ground for them that. And lastly, not only do they need staggered blooms, but they need a network of staggered blooms. They need to be able to forage, you know, beyond just one yard. And so many of us are in South Minneapolis, and, you know, together we can host populations of rusty patches if we all get gardens in the ground that wouldn't have otherwise been able to establish and stay healthy. So that's kind of the thrust of what pollinators need. This is an example of how we can do that. On the very left, we have a map of the existing known high quality habitat taken from GIS information in the city of Minneapolis. You can see it's really around the lakes and river and parkways. If you add a 200-meter buffer to that, that's the distance that the smallest pollinators can fly. You can see that there are a lot of splotches that aren't connected to anything else. And there's a lot of white space that a small pollinator would not be able to travel through without needing to refuel, not finding what it needs, and dying. This is the last image here on the right is not an example. It doesn't include all the native habitat that exists in the city, but this does include all the native habitat that Metro Blooms has installed, or we know we've installed through survey responses from our workshops. And you can see that even with just that subset of data we have, we are drawing connections, and we are stitching together pathways and neighborhoods that can start to support a larger diversity of pollinators.
John, before you go to the next slide, I'd like to add one more thing. You know, we all live in a very important area. Our communities and neighborhoods are part of, you know, a larger network flyway for birds, and there are over 320 species of birds, 50 mammals, and 145 amphibians and reptiles that live or travel through the Upper Mississippi River flyway in the Upper Mississippi River watershed. So it's not just our home. Okay, John.
Yeah, that's a good reminder.
Yeah.
Again, resilience, the term we talked about before. The dictionary defines it as a capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness. You know, we have a quote here that it's a measure of a system's ability to survive, persist, or even, you know, thrive within a variable environment. With climate change, with continued human development, this is a very variable environment. And so we need to make sure that our ecosystems are resilient enough to be able to handle it. So again, going to throw out a plug for diversity. If you have a diversity of plantings in your yard and you have a dry year, some of those plants might like drier years and they might thrive. If you have a wet year, you might have other plants that can handle that. If you just have one plant planted in your yard and every yard within 20 square miles, it's going to be much less capable of adapting to any kind of situation. And then if we get a pest like the emerald ash borer, all of a sudden you can wipe out all the ash trees in the city. And so diversity is really key to resilience.
Yeah, and that's happening. Thanks, John. I'd also like to talk about the idea of resilience in your community, and start thinking about, like, you know, what is your connection to your neighbors and your neighborhood? What is your connection to your watershed, which is a geographic boundary where water flows to one concentrated point, like the Minnehaha Creek flowing into the Mississippi River. That's an example of a watershed. And, you know, thinking about these social stacked benefits that that we can get when we participate in caring for the environment and being good stewards of the landscape. And again, I mentioned it earlier, and Metro Blooms has really been involved in some really great programs, even more so in the last few years, and thinking more about racial equity and actual environmental justice and resilience and sustainability, and having that up front and center. It's everyone is connected. Everyone is can make an impact on our water, and the more we learn about it together and work together, then our communities can actually rebound from other stresses like COVID-19 or like a tornado that'll come through. It's as simple as getting a cup of sugar from your neighbor or some flour or something like that. And so it's making new relationships with one another. And so it's really exciting to work in our neighborhood programs and seeing this happen with my own eyes and being a part of it. It's very exciting. I'm part of my job. And I think everyone at Metro Blooms is proud of our work that we do. But then zooming into your yard, thinking about back to resilience of the biodiversity of the different plants, and thinking about just trees and shrubs alone and how they capture carbon into their roots. You know, they're taking carbon dioxide out of the air and they're giving us all oxygen to breathe. They provide shade, which reduces the heating island effect. So hopefully we won't have to use our air conditioners as much, which cause more air pollution. So it's a counteraction of that. Clean air reduces your energy costs also of your house if you put your trees in the right spots. Native plants, you know, they're also providing habitat. Rain gardens capture runoff and protect our water resources. And we've already talked about all the healthy plants and how they support wildlife and infiltrate water. And then of course underground roots, and I'm going to get into roots later and how they build healthy soil and keep plants alive longer, so that you don't have to spend as much resources and time on your lawn like you would otherwise. So there's a lot of stacked environmental benefits to what we do. It's a win-win-win-win situation. So I hope everyone that's participating today, tonight, got some homework, and hopefully you put some thought into your own property. And if you haven't, that's okay, that's fine. Just think about your yard, think about the property or whatever area it is that you want to work in or make an impact with. First thing you want to think about is your functional use of your yard. How do you actively use it? How do you walk through it? How do you play on it? Is there a detached garage that you access, or a compost bin, or another workshop? And if you're not actively using your yard in any way, I would highly encourage you to convert that back into native habitat. You know, just thinking about how much lawn you might have, and or areas where you might have plants that just aren't working because it's too shady. It's underneath that ginormous maple tree. Nothing's surviving. And there's a lot of plant material that you can choose that's native that will work in those situations. Think about your existing trees and plants that you have and where they're located, and you know, what kind of shape are they in? Are they ash trees? If that's the case, there's a good chance that they're not going to survive in the next 5 to 10 years. And when the emerald ash borer gets a hold of an ash tree, they get brittle and they're very dangerous. So it's a safety issue. So you want to think about that. And then also put another layer of it. Think about hydrology and stormwater, how the water hits your roof, how it runs off your landscape, how it might be concentrated and flowing from your gutter, causing erosion, and where is it entering the alley or the street in front or back of your property. Is water coming from your neighbors through your property, or is your water draining onto your other neighbors? Is it going into the basement? Is that an issue? Where does it pool, and where does it flow? I highly recommend going outside on a good rain event, putting on your raincoat and your galoshes and a hat, and observing and just kind of looking to see what happens. And if you see water getting away from your property, then that would be a good opportunity to think about how you could capture it. And we'll talk about rain gardens and stormwater management. That's a big part of what I do. But you can incorporate native plantings in those types of areas. This is a site plan that Metro Blooms put together a couple of years ago, and it's a really good illustration of what you could do and how you could think about your landscape. Those dark green areas represent rain gardens, and rain gardens are just shallow depressions in the landscape. And they're just designed to mitigate the impervious surfaces of like your roof or your driveway or your sidewalks or your deck, patio, and allow that water to slow down and soak into the ground and cool and filter that water the way nature intended it through the soil. But you want to make sure that it's a safe distance away from your house too. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, siting. And then think about how you'd walk through that landscape. So this shows a stepping stone path so that we can walk around and enjoy those new landscapes, but it also eases in maintenance. So it makes it easier to care for those landscapes and tend to them and enjoy them. You'll see this dark gray section, which is an old driveway that wasn't being used and it's all cracked up. And before, all that water was just draining straight through the sidewalk and into the street. And so these guys removed all that. They put a new sidewalk in, and then they planted it. And I'm going to go to the next slide, which shows the planting plan. And where'd the rain gardens go? Good question. You can't even really tell where they are. Rain gardens are typically only about 6 inches deep in this smaller, like urban residential context. And the plants that you're going to use in those will get anywhere from 6 inches to 4 foot tall. You could even go with Joe Pye weed that'll get up to 7 foot tall, or cup plant. Those get really tall. And so once the native plants grow up, you would never even realize that there's a shallow depression there and it's capturing stormwater and cleaning it and filtering it. And then those rain gardens are integrated into a much broader and more expansive landscape that also harbors so much life. And we'll get into that in a little while. It's really exciting to see how your yard could be transformed. So big takeaway here is, if you're not actively using parts of your yard, consider converting it to native habitat. One real easy way to capture stormwater, or at least slow it down, is to redirect the downspout into your yard in a safe place. And so if you have questions about this, talk to your designers. We're all knowledgeable on how you can do this. It's a very inexpensive way. In this case, this was one of our blooming alleys projects, where half of the garage was actually draining directly to the alley. Who's seen the alley when it's raining? It's like a river. It's just so much water is pouring down it. And part of that is attributable to those roofs and driveways that are draining to them. So redirecting that stormwater to the backyard, in this case, we created a rain garden back there. So it added a beautiful splash of color, and all of the bees and butterflies and birds enjoyed that. Here's another example of what we call overhead conveyance. And otherwise there was a downspout that was just draining right to the corner of the garage. And it was a tripping hazard, and it was a problem in the winter with ice buildup. And here we went overhead and brought it into a little swale that then drained away along the property line. Another example of swales here on this page. If anyone is into Pinterest, warning, right? You can lose a lot of time looking up imagery in Pinterest. But if you were to do like dry creek beds and vegetated swales, you'll see all kinds of ideas on how you can add some structure to your yard and convey and move water. So swales, they are kind of like rain gardens. They're depressions or like ditches, but they have slope along the bottom and they move water along the bottom. So think of like a county road and a ditch that is next to a county road. And the bottom left image is a good example of that. And this is just planted with iris. This is like a spring photograph, and it's I think there's some mountain mint in there, which is a really awesome plant also for pollinators that blooms in the summer, a white blooming. And it's beautiful. And all that runoff that comes from this lawn, which there's still a place for a lawn, so I'm not saying get rid of it all, but all that runoff then goes into this swale at the perimeter of the yard and gets filtered before it overflows into the receiving water body. So pretty cool stuff. Let's get into some native plant talk. We've already talked about, what are the benefits of native plants. They provide habitat for lots of wildlife. Just look at all the species of purple coneflower alone is amazing. I have purple coneflower in my yard, and I've seen 6 different species of native bees, which there's over 400 native bees in Minnesota, mind you, bees that have lived here for thousands of years, and butterflies and birds. And so it's really amazing the life that'll come to your property once you start adding diversity of plants to it. All these native plants, they have co-evolved with these species of birds, bees, and butterflies and other. It's all part of the food web, right? It's so important. And the deep root systems of these native plants are incredible. They are very deep. This is an old graphic that's been used for a long, long time. Some of you may have seen it. But in the left is the root system of your turf grass, and it's about 2 to 3 inches. It's about the depth of your ear alone, if you can kind of think about that. And that's why John calls it green concrete, because it's not very deep, and there's a lot of runoff that comes off of turf grass, believe it or not. And then look at all of the deep roots of native plants. Purple coneflower in the middle is one of the shallower ones, and that gets down over 5 feet deep. You know, think about that. You know, if you're 6 foot tall, hold out your arms. Your wingspan is your height, and that is how deep they're going down into the ground. And the other cool thing about this is they're re-engineering the soil. About 30% of the root mass will slough off every year. That's where the carbon sequestering happens. It's adding carbon back down into the earth, and all that organic is holding moisture and a lot of billions and billions of microbes as well. 1 teaspoon of soil, we're going to get into soil in a second, but 1 teaspoon of soil, healthy soil, has more microorganisms than there are people on the planet. It's unbelievable. So as these native plants mature, more root channels are formed and infiltration increases. And so the filtering of stormwater and infiltration, soaking of stormwater back into the soil, increases as these plants mature. It's an incredible thing that happens. John, are you still with us? You're mic'd, and do you want to talk about soil? Or you're muted, not mic'd.
Yep. Yeah. So speaking of soil, I do want to go back, and I want you all to think about all of the species of wildlife that can browse and use all of those beautiful wildflowers in that image, and kind of how much more biomass they can provide an ecosystem than 2-inch tall turf grass. And flip that in your head and then see, you know, these healthy microbes that Rich is talking about. They eat, they either eat decaying matter, or some plants will even, as they photosynthesize, you know, they take sunlight and, gosh, what's my chemistry? Water, and they turn it into carbohydrates. Many of them will overproduce carbohydrates and exude them out of their roots into a root zone where healthy microbes can establish themselves and end up engaging in some kind of trade with the plants, either protecting them from other harmful microbes or supplying trace nutrients that the plant roots themselves might not be able to reach, but the microbes can form a chain and eat the carbohydrate exudates from the plant, and then also supply it with selenium or whatever other kind of trace chemical it needs. So these deeper root systems extend the area of life that we can have below the surface as well.
And you're talking about mycorrhizae and fungi networks. And I will plug real quick, we do have another workshop totally dedicated to building good soil community. So I'm not sure if we have any more this year. I know we've had some already. So.
Yeah, everything I've learned from Bob Dahm of Organic Bob, Russ Henry of Giving Tree Gardens, and Cassie Brown of Renaissance Soils. And they put together a phenomenal Healthy Soils workshop for us. Yeah, I could geek out more, but I shouldn't, because we're on a timeline and you want to talk with designers.
You could geek out a lot about soil health.
So this is 2 pictures of corn stalks, and even just corn, which is an annual. It doesn't develop a complex root system, but you can see how well it does in compacted versus decompacted soil. And so even growing a plant with not a great root system, making sure that you have healthy decompacted soil is going to help those plants and is going to help the soil. One of the ways that we encourage keeping your soil decompacted is by, again, reducing your use of fungicides specifically that can harm the mycorrhizae that Rich mentioned, and kind of tear apart the communities below ground that we're trying to build. The other thing that we recommend with soil, and I'm going to get to the tips with all of them in one place, before that, here's just another picture of perennial roots and annual agricultural roots. Very stark image right there. But the 4 things you can do for healthy soil very quickly are to keep your soil covered, because even the force of a raindrop falling from the sky can begin to compact your soil. That's either keeping it covered in living plant material or dead plant material, mulch as we call it. That mulch will break down over time and help feed the soil. Minimizing disturbance, that's chemical disturbance like I talked about, or physical disturbance. A lot of farmers are getting on the no-till bandwagon, and in your food gardens, I'd recommend you look into trying not tilling up all the dirt every year, leaving those microbiotic communities that have formed together. It's kind of like a small town in the soil of little bacteria and fungi, and you have a tornado that comes through once, they can rebuild. But if you have a metaphorical tornado that comes back every year, a few times a year, and destroys a community that they've built, you're going to have a much poorer town and poorer diversity in the soil as well, which, as I can't fail to point out once more, contributes to diversity, contributes to resilience. So minimizing disturbance of any kind. Increasing plant diversity and canopy layers above ground. If you can, you're talking overstory trees, understory trees, shrubs, herbs, and a ground cover. Different plants have different rooting structures, which, again, if you flip your concept of the world upside down, will form different root canopies into the soil world that different microbiome communities will like. And the last tip we have for you is to add a high quality compost. If it comes in a bag, if it's been pasteurized, that means it's been sterilized, and all of the biotic activity that you want is has been killed. Get a compost that smells nice and earthy, and you know, I'd recommend getting it in bulk instead of a bag, and spread it around. I don't think of compost anymore as a fertilizer so much as an inoculant that can start to spread the healthy microbes that you want in your soil. So that said, that's your healthy soils. You got the base of whatever you're going to grow. Now we're going to talk about the 4 main project types that we're promoting through the Lawns to Legumes program. These are not the only projects you can undertake in your yard. We've talked on Downspout, Redirection, and there are some variations on these, like Raingardens, that you can do. But these are the 4 types that if you either get a Lawns to Legumes individual grant or you're involved in a demonstration neighborhood, scratch that. If you get an individual grant, that's all your, you can only be reimbursed for one of these 4 projects. In a demonstration neighborhood, there might be more options. I will leave that to your neighborhood to tell you that. So native pocket plantings, pollinator beneficial trees and shrubs, pollinator lawns, pollinator meadows. These 4 planting types were chosen because they have something to offer for everyone, and they're ordered in the priority that the Board of Water and Soil Resources wanted to stress. They believe that native pocket plantings or small native gardens are the ways to provide as much diversity as possible to foraging bees, will also, you know, have people able to install and maintain them. Trees are easy to maintain, and just about anyone can find a place for a tree in their yard. And then as the list goes down, pollinator lawns are great, and pollinator meadows are probably, the ecological bang for your buck is the best, but they are the most difficult to establish. And so that's the order that these are in.
Right. Well, thank you, John. We are about 15 to 20 minutes left here, and I am going to go through some of the examples of what you can do. And so let's talk about native plant pocket plantings. It's one of the 4. And this is really the simplest thing that anyone can do. There's room almost in every single yard for a very small native planting garden. As small as a 10-foot by 10-foot garden. You could even go 5 by 5, to be honest with you. It can offer an immense amount of resources for pollinators. To install these, it's quite simple. You could either rent a sod kicker and physically, or with a flat shovel, physically remove the sod, or you could do some sheet mulching. And if you Google sheet mulching, you can find lots of ways to do it. And there's a resource that will be in your packet that you will receive on how to do this. And that's a way that you could actually put material over that turf and kill it. And then that turf becomes organic material for the rest. You can plant right into it. And so and also a lot of the Blue Thumb partners are coming out with kits for plants that make it really, really easy for you to implement one of these native plant pocket plantings. And lastly, there are those templates and guides in the Bowser website for you. If you don't want to even think about it, you can just use one of those templates. It makes it very easy. Another variation of a native pocket planting is a rain garden. And that's what I specialize in, and I do want to touch base on it briefly. When we first started doing these presentations years ago, the city of Minneapolis wanted, this is really about water quality and native habitat. So rain gardens, this is a diagram of one in a cross section. And there's a few key points I want to make. It's very important that the basin bottom is perfectly flat in all directions. And then your side slopes, like the side of a bowl, are 3 to 1, 3 horizontal to 1 vertical, and that's that angle going down. And then there's a berm on the downhill side to contain that bowl shape. And the depth of your rain garden is always measured from your overflow point. And I would say 90 to 95% of the rain gardens that I design in residential settings are 6 inches deep, no more. And so with that 3 to 1 side slope, if it's 6 inches deep, then it'll be 3 times the depth to the top from the bottom. So from that line of the bottom of the basin, it would be 18 inches to the top. So to get an idea of the scale of a rain garden, generally you want about a 3-foot wide bottom, and if you have a 1.5 foot with the side slope on both sides, you're dealing with a 6-foot wide planting. So generally speaking, it's about 4 to 8 feet wide, and however long you need to mitigate that stormwater. Of course, we have native plants growing in them. For mulch in rain gardens, I recommend using double shredded hardwood mulch. And that's because it's fibrous and it binds together and it won't float away. When we design rain gardens, we try to design them to capture the 1 inch in 24-hour rain event. That's 90%, 85 to 90% of the rain events that occur are 1 inch or less. And it's also capturing that first flush of stormwater, which has the highest percentage of pollutants in it. Think about when you go and wash your car, right? And the car is sitting out in the street or outside, and then 2 days later, it's all filled with dust and stuff from the trees. Well, that is everywhere. So that first flush of stormwater is the highest pollutant load, and that's what we want to capture. So that's what we designed these for. When we install rain gardens, we also amend the soils and uncompact them. So John was mentioning you don't want to disturb the soil until, well, we do recommend doing it just once in the very beginning, because think about your yard. You might have a house that's 60 to 100 years old. It's been growing Kentucky bluegrass for all this time, and that soil is heavily compacted. It hasn't had a whole lot of root system growing through it. So you want to uncompact that soil, ideally mix in some compost that will hold moisture in the soil, so it'll allow these new plants to get established as quickly as possible and send those roots down and get established. So those are a few key points. Talk to your designers if you have questions about rain gardens. There's a lot of wonderful resources on the Blue Thumb website and the Metro Blooms website. I will talk real quick about siting, where to locate them. You want to make sure that a rain garden is at least 10 feet away from your house, ideally 15 feet. The last thing you want to do is concentrate stormwater and have that go right down into your basement. So you want to be aware of that. You also want to call for, or you want to be aware of where your existing trees are. Just knowing that the closer to that trunk of the tree, the more prevalent the root systems are. So a lot of times I'll actually design a rain garden right around the perimeter of the drip line of that canopy. And that's a really good zone to put a rain garden in. Of course, utility lines, always go for state one before you dig. That's a state law. And so you want to know where those utility lines are. Sanitary sewer and water supply are below frost, so usually that's not an issue if it's only a 6-inch deep rain garden. And even gas lines you can put rain gardens on top of, but you definitely want to know where they are, and you want to be very careful in digging around them. I would not recommend putting trees over those lines, because if they have to replace it, then they have to dig that up and out the tree goes. So be very careful and know about that. So a real quick series of slides that shows a rain garden installation. This is a sod kicker that you can rent from Redirection or another hardware rental place. These pictures also have crew members from the Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa. And we work with the Conservation Corps to install a lot of our neighborhood or rain gardens and blooming boulevards projects. So I like to feature them in our pictures, and I like to teach them everything I know in the short amount of time that I have with them. So anyway, they kick the sod out, and then they ensure that there's drainage coming from hard surfaces, so that, in this case, they cut a swale from that downspout. And then they dig the basin bottom first, and then they cut the side slopes out, and then they turn that soil as deep as they could with the shovel, about 9 to 12 inches deep. They spread 1 inch of compost throughout the entire basin and side slopes and top area. And then they mixed in that compost and amended the soils. They checked to make sure that basin bottom is perfectly flat, perfectly level. This is really important. The last thing you want is to have a little lower point, because then any suspended solids in that water will clog your rain garden over time. So you want that infiltration to be efficient. And then they spread mulch after that, and then they plant. So plant selection, I do recommend getting a variety of sizes, but it's more cost effective to get like 4-inch containers as opposed to 1 gallons. It's about a third of the cost, a quarter to a third the cost. It takes 3 years for native plants to really get established and get fairly mature. So in 3 years, your plants are all going to be the same size anyway. So you're saving a lot of money by putting in smaller plant material. But just know that if you want like immediate blooms the following year, you might want to mix in some 1-gallon containers in with your planting. So you want to spread out those plants before you plant them. And we do, recommend understanding how large the plants get. And in our resources, you'll see a table. But we're learning more and more that it's nice to pack them in a little tighter, because then that prevents weeds from growing in between while those plants are maturing. And they'll kind of outcompete one another. And some of them might not make it. We have about 10% mortality mortality is fairly common with these plants, and then the others will thrive. And after 3 years, you have vegetative cover over the entire bed, and that's what prevents erosion, and that's what creates healthy soil. So you want to spread them out first, and then you can dig them. Here's some erosion control or protection from an inlet. We do recommend using, I prefer using like 3 or 4 to 6 inch size rock. And that's because if you do need to clean it out like every other year, it's easy to move them and clean that out and then put them back. I'm not a big fan of the real fine rock, but if you do use the fine rock, you might want to put a heavy duty weed barrier under that. But just knowing that might get silted in, sediment will go in and weeds will grow out of that too, and you might be just ripping that out in 5 years. So I actually don't use weed barrier in my designs. It's just something that's a headache in the long run. Once your plants are established, they outcompete the weeds for the most part. I do have a wonderful video that I don't know how well it's going to work on Zoom, but let's give it a shot and see what happens. This is in the Powderhorn neighborhood, and you'll see, you know, Mini Hands makes light work, and they cut the sod out. Now they're digging out the basin, cutting the side slopes, and then they will spread that compost throughout the entire planting area. After they cut the side slopes, they'll uncompact that soil and turn all that compost in and mix it up really nice. I'll tell you, doing this with friends is a lot of fun, and it makes it go a lot faster. So then they spread the mulch first, and then they laid out the plants. Why do you spread the mulch first, you might ask? Well, one reason is because we just uncompacted all the soil. And then when you're walking on it again, it's not compacting as much. So it's distributing your weight. We also use mulch for a couple of reasons. We want to, it retains moisture in the soil, and it also suppresses weed growth. Think of all those annual weeds like dandelions or thistle that might blow in from the air. Well, that needs soil contact, so the mulch will prevent that. So then they planted it as you saw, and make sure that the plants are put in at the same level on the soil as they were in the container, and then give it a good drink. You never know how long these plants have been sitting in these plastic containers, and you want to water it really thoroughly when you finish planting. And when you water, folks, you want to make sure that you water for a good amount of time and get that water to soak into the ground. So that encourages the roots of these new plants to go seek out that water deeper in. We've added compost so that retains moisture, and it's better to water long and deep as opposed to like not very long and like frequently, because that's just wetting the top surface and it doesn't allow for good root establishment. Right, so wasn't that easy? That was such an easy task. So I like to empower you all to know how easy it can be. I would like to touch base on a couple of other variations. Boulevard rain gardens or boulevard bioswales is a project that we're doing a lot in Twin City or Minneapolis. This is a case where we started in Harrison neighborhood in North Minneapolis, and now we are extending it all throughout North Minneapolis. 85% of the street trees in Harrison in this one section were ash trees. And so they were all in danger of getting the emerald ash borer, or got the emerald ash borer, and they were dangerous. So the park board cut them down. We reshaped the boulevards so that they're depressed 3 inches lower than the sidewalk and the top of the curb. We've done it a couple different ways. I prefer to go straight across like the bottom image. And so that allows for more stormwater capture from that runoff, the last chance before it gets to the street. And then we planted with a wide variety of different forbs. In this image, this is all wild strawberry. And it might bear just a little bit of fruit, but it's more for aesthetics. I don't know if I'd recommend eating those, but it's amazing how much water it captures and how beautiful it can be. So we have information in our workshop booklets in your resource packet for this. A lot of different planting options. Another variation is lakeshore planting, and If you know people that live on a lake, or if you do yourself, this is important. This is a buffer strip that allows all that runoff that might be coming from the properties above to filter out before they get to the lake. And it can really be a wonderful habitat for pollinators and other wildlife. And there's a wide variety of plants that you can choose in here to preserve views. That's one reason why people like to live on lakes. So it doesn't have to be all tall foliage. Planting design is, and designing rain gardens is really, really important. Some folks think that, you know, native plants are unruly and wild and not really the most aesthetically pleasing. And it's really important to design with intent, design with clean edges, and using edging or linear lines like the sidewalk edge or like a wall or even like a shrub row. And so having hard edges is really beneficial to an acceptable looking garden in your yard. And also another really helpful tip is using signage. This tells people, I am a rain garden, I am pollinator habitat. I'm here for a reason, and you can get these signs online, a wide variety of different resources. If you are a participant of the program, you will receive this sign here. And so I need to keep moving. Choosing plants. It's really important for you to understand how much sunlight there is. Obviously, you know, you want to choose the right plant for the right place. And a lot of people feel, or they might think that there's not anything that grows in the shade underneath this, you know, huge elm tree or maple tree or in the north side of my house. And there is a great plant palette that we have of native plants that do bloom in those conditions. Also that soil moisture where the rain garden is. What are the characteristics? Is it just in one little area or is it throughout the site? Again, plant density is important. We do now encourage going a little closer than what they will grow into. But you do want to know how big they get, especially trees and shrubs. You don't want to put a 60-foot canopy tree 10 feet from your house, right? So understand how big they will get in maturity. And also a nice tip is thinking about how tall your plants get and where are you viewing your landscape bed from. Are you viewing it from a picture window or from a walk, from a driveway? Think of it as taking a family picture, right? Tall people in back, short people in front. And it's a great way to arrange the plants. We do recommend using a mixture of grasses, flowers, and shrubs for diversity. Again, diversity is key. And then choosing plants that bloom through the spring, summer, and fall. Again, so that there's lots and lots of opportunity for the rusty patch bumblebee and all of his winged friends to enjoy that. Plant massing is another really great way to design. Think of the bumblebees or even the honeybees, which are not native, they're domestic bees, but they like to go to an area where there's a lot of food. And so it makes it a lot easier for them to go to one area. And also when it comes to caring for your landscape and weeding, if there's a plant that's in that grouping of like species, it's a weed, out it goes, it makes it a lot easier. In your booklet, in your packet that you have, the PDF file, you have this great series of images that we've put together for you for rain garden design in a sun to part sun condition. These plants are all useful and they will thrive in a drier condition up on the edges. And as you'll see, they bloom prairie smoke in the spring. Coreopsis will be popping here in another week or two. And then through the summer, butterfly milkweed, blazing stars, there's a lot of liatrous varieties that benefit the monarch butterfly. And all the way into the fall. Let's not forget about food source in the fall, and asters are a great choice. And then what happens on the side slopes of a rain garden where there's medium moisture? there's a wide variety of plants. One of my favorite is blue indigo, a beautiful blue color. And black-eyed Susans, we're all familiar with those. Those are fantastic. Those do well in medium moisture areas. And then on the bottoms of the rain gardens or other wet areas, you want to use plants that can handle wet feet, but knowing these plants also can survive in times of drought once they're established. And so they're a wonderful variety of plants. Bee balm or monarda is great for the rusty patch. Rose milkweed, also called swamp milkweed, fantastic. So think about what plants go where at different moisture regimes. We have a great series of slides also for really shady conditions, and my columbine's blooming right now. Actually, wild geranium also, and then in the fall or in the later season, the wild garlic, nodding onion, and big leaf aster up in, this is the dry areas. The plants that are in this dry zone would be beneficial to continue throughout a pollinator garden beyond your rain garden. Medium moisture. One thing that I would talk about, have you all aware of, is sedges. Sedges have edges. Pennsylvania sedge is one of my favorites, and it grows really well in a wide variety of different moisture levels and sun and shade conditions. There's another monarda, Bradbury's monarda, more asters in this flower. So we've made it really easy for you all to just get started if you have no idea on how to start. And of course, plants that do well on the bottom. All right, we're going to keep moving here. Let's talk about trees and shrubs. I saw someone said that there are apple trees blooming right now, and that's a great time, cherry trees. My serviceberry is blooming. This is a great list. And by the way, you will all also get a copy of this presentation. You can come back and look at all these great resources. So these are trees that benefit the rusty patch bumblebee. You believe it or not, the basswood is a great one. I've mentioned serviceberry, pagoda dogwood, plums, cherries, apple, fantastic. And then also think about all the different shrubs that benefit. So if you have larger landscapes that you want to cover, shrubs are a great option because obviously they get bigger. But understand how big they will get when you're laying out a planting plan. So you're not putting them too close to each other or too close to a structure. A lot of these are also edible to us. You get a question about what can we eat as well, and the cherries, of course, and the serviceberry is a great option. You can see here the serviceberry, also called Juneberry, so you can get these berries before the birds. I like to put them in my yogurt. I actually have a friend who brewed some beer with it as an extract, and it's fantastic. Yeah, this is a beautiful shade garden. Isn't that lovely? Wild geranium, Jacob's ladder, pagoda dogwood, a wide variety of species that are thriving in the shade environment. I like to highlight this to also show the structure of height of plants and the ground covers and the perennial plantings, and then shrub, and then understory trees and shade trees. And we're trying to mimic that plant community that was once here at one time. So let's look at our yard again. Let's think about where we can put this vegetation, finding the right plants and, for the right place, trees and shrubs. So here we're placing a shade tree on that southwest or west side of the house, which provides shading in the winter in the summertime to save energy costs on your house on the hottest part of the summer. We also, I forgot, I got some animation here on this. Here we put a rain garden at right down by the garage where water was actually causing a hazard over the sidewalk. And then we put a serviceberry shade or understory tree right in that area. It does well with wet feet. It does well in part shade. Great spot for that serviceberry. We also put in some columnar trees where there's an undesirable view. I think there's a kitchen window in one place and looking into a family room, and you don't always want to see your neighbors. So maybe you want to screen that view. And there are some cultivar trees that do get a columnar shape that will screen that view. So if you have these issues that you want to talk about this to your designer. Also, framing your yard with a variety of shrubs. And then we also recommend putting like a conifer right in the prevailing winter winds, and that also helps to save energy costs on your house. And then finally, again, don't put a tree within 5 feet of a major utility line, specifically like a sewer, gas, or water line. In case they have to replace that, they won't have to tear out the entire tree. Installing trees, you want to dig your hole twice the diameter of the root ball or the container. And we recommend amending that soil with compost, and then putting that tree so that the root flare is right at the same level as the soil. And you want to fill that, backfill it up. I like to soak that hole with water when it's half full, compress it, get the air pockets out, continue to backfill, and then give it a good drink again, fill it up with water. And then spread mulch around the top of it. You want to be careful not to have the mulch pushed right up against the trunk of the tree, but you want a good 2 to 3 inches of mulch around that entire area. And that keeps moisture into the soil so that tree doesn't dry out. There's a great variety of trees that just provide wonderful textures with their bark and other forms to shape, to guide the eye and design. This is red bud up on the right, and the red buds are blooming right now, and they are just beautiful. And of course, they're providing food source for pollinators. That's the whole point of this discussion. We have been getting the questions more and more about edibles, incorporating them into your landscape. I wouldn't recommend so much putting them in the rain garden itself, but certainly around the perimeters of rain gardens or throughout your landscape. Again, trees, think about the serviceberry. Maple trees provide maple syrup if you want to tap that when they get big. Shagbark hickory is a cool one. Apple, pear, plum, apricot, tart cherry. We can eat those. Also benefits the rusty patch. This is a great resource. Raspberries, blackberries, rose hips, currants, honeyberry, hops. You could use those for your beer if you are a home brewer, or if you have a neighbor that's a home brewer, and grapes. And then those perennials, the strawberries, asparagus, rhubarb, and chives. Think about these that are perennials that come up every year. You can benefit from these. Some of these, I have chives that I like to pick, and then I throw them in my omelets on the morning. So Swiss chard and kale is fun to incorporate as well. All right, pollinator lawns. John, I know we're probably running a little behind. I'm trying to go as fast as I can here. Do you want to talk about
we have, I'm going to run through this real quick, and we're still okay, but as long as we can get into our breakout rooms by 7:10.
All right, we're almost there, folks, so bear with us. There's so much to cover.
Yep, but we're going to have to go through it a little bit quickly.
Yeah.
So pollinator lawns. Basically, you got your regular lawn, green concrete. We can improve the ecological function of that by increasing the diversity of it, and incorporating low-growing flowers that can bloom underneath 3 or 4 inches into a lawn to provide habitat or forage for pollinators above ground, and below ground provide the diversity of root structures that help to infiltrate more water. We recommend using fine fescues as kind of the basic building block, the grass for these pollinator lawns. It's a type of grass that grows slower, so it needs less water, less fertilizer, and it grows deeper roots. Sometimes it's called no-mow or low-mow grass because it doesn't have to be mowed very often. Sometimes just once or twice a year. It gets this kind of flowy wave texture when you let it grow tall, and it looks like an ocean of grass above ground. And in that fine fescue, we recommend Dutch white clover, self-heal or prunella, and creeping thyme is a standard bee-lawn mix. Violets are also a great addition, and though they aren't specifically supporting rusty patch bumblebees, there are native species of butterflies that rely on violets for a host plant. If you're ready to share your lawn with others, the easiest way to do that, if it's in okay shape and not infested with a bunch of creeping Charlie or other invasive weed that would really take advantage of what you're about to do to it, the first thing you do is mow your lawn as short as possible. This is to stress it out and to clear out as much of the shade, any material that could shade the ground. And you rake those clippings because you want to expose the soil. The next step is you spread your seed. We have seeding rates at bluethumb.org/turf alternatives. There's a handout in the virtual resources folder we've shared with you with the seeding rates for fescue, clover, thyme, and self-heal. As you spread your seed, compost or sand make good bulking agents. And then you want to keep that moist. We oftentimes use germination blankets over biodegradable germination blankets over freshly sown lawn. You can also spread straw that's been cleaned so that it doesn't have a bunch of hay seeds in it. Once they sprout and they kind of grow up along with the grass that was there, they will eventually outcompete most of the basically Kentucky bluegrass that was your lawn beforehand. Some might still persist, but a little diversity doesn't hurt. Never again mow below 3 inches. As Rich said, roots grow as deep as you let the leaves grow high, and longer grass helps shade out the soil beneath it, keeping it cooler so that it needs less water, and making it less attractive for weed seeds to infiltrate, sprout, germinate, and grow. Lastly, you've done all this work to introduce flowers to your lawn. Herbicides, you know, the kind of weed and feed herbicides are kind of broad spectrum weeds. They broad leaf weeds they target, and so that's going to remove a lot the flowers that you worked on. So after that point, hand weeding is great. A lot of people come to peace with the dandelions in their lawn. They are great. Dandelions are wonderful pollinator forage in the spring as an early bloom. And they would have been, I think they would have been included in this bee lawn mix had they been more socially acceptable. But social acceptance starts somewhere. It can start with us. That is what I have for you on pollinator lawns.
Right. The last option in the Lawns and Legumes program is a pollinator meadow, and really this is just a series of pocket plantings. And so if you have an opportunity to do a much larger area, the pollinator meadow could be an option. And it's really, you know, how to install it. Again, we recommend just doing it bite by bite, section by section. This is an example of solarizing in the upper right corner, and the bottom right is sheet mulching, or if you were to Google the term lasagna mulching, that is another style where you put in, you crop your soil or crop your lawn really short like before, but then you would spread some compost, then you would put cardboard over it, and then you would put mulch, and then another layer of cardboard, wet it all down. And actually, Bob Dom and Organic Bob has a great recipe where you actually add molasses to the soil right before you spread a mixture of molasses and water. And what that does is it creates an awesome resource for bacteria and fungi to just gobble up all the organic, and it kills all the plant material and roots mass of what's below it, even creeping Charlie and all the other plants that weren't doing well. And so sheet mulching actually can be a very good way to do it, and then you're not physically cutting out the sod, and then you're like, what do I do with the sod, and what do I do with all this stuff? So it does take time, just knowing that you know, it's going to be a season of work, but the long-term benefits are awesome, and it really helps build the soil. All right, I'm going to talk about maintenance briefly. I did talk about watering. We do recommend watering at least 1 inch per week, and that's of course if it's not coming from the sky. So you might want to get yourself a rain gauge, or just put out like a tuna fish can. Put out your sprinkler, or if you're hand watering, just measure, you know, if it's like 15 minutes on the sprinkler, see how much that fills up. If it's a ½ an inch, then do that twice a week if it doesn't come from the sky. Again, it's better to water long and deep as opposed to shallow and frequent. You want to pull weeds as soon as you can. And you know, this is a Siberian elm. And would you rather pull it out when it's small, or after a year to 2 years, or after, you know, a long time? And and if these are growing next to your fence lines or your foundations, you absolutely want to get them out. If they're getting bigger, it helps to put a spade shovel down and loosen up those roots and then yank them out. But you want to get them out for sure as soon as you can while they're small. You want to keep those plantings clear of debris, you know, any garbage that might go in there, of course, keep it tidy. And then replace the mulch as needed. Once your plants are established, you don't need to add more mulch every year. But if there's some areas where the plants may not have made it, and if there's bare soil, you want to make sure it's covered with mulch. Some pointers on when to weed or when to go out and care for your landscape. I like to think about these big holidays coming up: Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day. I actually throw in Mother's Day, which we just had, for the early spring. That's a good time to cut down your plant material in the spring. I like to leave up my coneflower and a lot of my other plant material through the winter because it just is beautiful winter interest, and cut that down. But when I do cut them down, I cut them 18 inches above the ground, because we're learning more and more that the stalks of these plants are habitat for solitary bees that burrow out the pith and live in there. And they lay their eggs in there, and they put in their pollen balls, and they live in the stems of these. One thing that I learned just recently is we really recommend not doing yard work until the average temperature is 50 degrees. So, you know, it's really right when the dandelions start to bloom. And the reason for that is there's a lot of life that could be in your leaves and in your landscape that if you were to remove all those leaves and everything, then you could be killing a lot of wildlife. So that's a good pointer to think about. Again, over time, you'll want to, if you have a massing of plants, you'll want to divide them in the spring. And it depends on the species. A lot of times you don't need to do that at all. Inspect for erosion and troubled spots. And if there is erosion happening, look to see where it's coming from. You might want to add rock to prevent that from washing into your rain garden. And then in the fall, again, leave those stems up. Lastly, you really want to figure out, you know, what we've talked about, all these great options of what you can do. The first thing, of course, is you can sign up for updates through the Lawns and Legumes program on the website. You can apply for individual support if you live in the Corcoran Phillips neighborhood. I'll let Lila fill you in on next steps for that. Collaborate with your neighbors. Again, that video, it was amazing. You can see how quickly things can happen. The same goes for caring for your landscape. Have a party. Of course, stay 6 feet apart in this time of COVID-19. Practice social distancing. If you've got friends, another couple, then you know, family units can be closer together. It's a lot of fun. Start planning where you can start adding habitat to your landscape. Lila, do you want to talk real quick about the program again?
Yeah, and another way to take action is through the neighborhood project. The Corcoran and Phillips Pollinator Project is accepting signups for all residents in Corcoran Phillips neighborhoods, including Ventura Village, Phillips West, East Phillips, and Midtown Phillips. If you're interested in becoming involved, please email lila@metroblooms.org or call 612-293-4027. We're going to share this information with a follow-up email too. I also want you to know to stay tuned for a webpage specifically for the project where you could find out any details or information about it through metroblooms.org. It'll be coming live soon, and that will include a Google form link to sign up for it too, if that's easier. I also just want to say, as we continue to stay at home and practice social distancing, we hope that you and your family stay well and safe as we're coming through this challenging time together. We're offering this to hopefully inspire active healing of the earth and encourage you to connect with your environment and make a difference from your yard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lila. Those are great words.